Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bitcoin Mentor Q&A. I'm Ed behind the Live Free BTC handle, and I'm joined here by Nathan on the Bitcoin Mentor handle. We also have Emma up here on the DreamGrad Academy, and our guest speaker today is Dr. Shawn Baker. As always, if at any point you'd like to come up and ask a question to riff, rant, rave about Bitcoin, join in on the topics that we're discussing, we'd love to have you. So let's start. Shawn Baker, how you doing today?
Yeah, good. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, like I said, I apologize. I had to reschedule because I just got another conflict at the other time. So I will just put this out there. I am not a Bitcoin expert, but I do hold Bitcoin, and I just kind of do the dollar cost averaging, as I was told by Saifedean and some of the other guys that I'm friends with that are also carnivore. And so my sort of expertise or sort of, I guess, thing I'm passionate about is nutrition and health. And so, like I said, I'm very supportive of Bitcoin, but like I said, I'm certainly not the world's leading expert on that for sure.
That's totally fine. I know we're gonna have a ton of questions today, so I do want to be respectful of your time. But maybe you could just give a quick overview of how you got into Bitcoin, then being a doctor, and what that experience has been for you so far.
Yeah, so I mean, so like I said, and people know me for this crazy carnivore diet. I'm my background is an orthopedic surgeon. I spent years as an orthopedist. I spent some time in the military doing combat trauma surgery over in Afghanistan for a period of time. And so back when I think it was in 2016, I started doing this kind of nutty carnivore diet. And I went on Joe Rogan's podcast. And I think a fellow that you guys are probably familiar with, Saifedean Amos, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, contacted me to write a book about this diet because he had already been doing that for even, I think, a year or two longer than I had. And so I got to meet Saif. We spent some time together, and this is right about the time he started getting tied up writing his book, the Bitcoin Standard. So then, obviously, he took off in that regard. So I ended up writing my own book at the request of a publisher. So that's where I got in. Was first made aware of Bitcoin. There's another guy by the name of Michael Goldstein, who's his handle I think is Bitstein. I think he's the president of the uh, one of the Bitcoin organizations, the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute or something like that. And so, I met both those guys, and they've had some early influence on me. I like most people. I wish I would have jumped in earlier than I did. I didn't really get into Bitcoin and start, investing in it until a few years ago. But like I said, I'm certainly very much align philosophically with it. I think it just makes sense in many ways. Now, again, we all may be right or we may all be wrong. I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm not at the point where I'm selling my house and living in a van by the river to buy more Bitcoin, but I do regularly just put money aside for that. That's my major sort of investment that I pretty much concern myself with, and it's just. Like I said, I think there's a lot of synergy between what Bitcoin is trying to accomplish within the financial world and what I do within the nutrition world. I think there's a lot of, I know there's the whole concern of, or the whole concept of fiat, fiat money versus, fiat food in many ways. And so we're seeing a kind of a huge synergy there. And I see a lot of Bitcoin dudes are adopting a more carnivorous lifestyle. And I think, in my view, and again, people talk about proof of work. I mean, obviously, Bitcoin is now, I think the market cap is over $1 trillion. So it's obviously here, and people believe in it. And the only reason they believe in it because it's actually proven itself to work to some degree. And I think the same thing with the diet. The only reason people are eating this crazy diet that I talk about, and the only reason they should, is because it works. And like I said, I'm here saying this is a therapeutic tool. It has tremendous potential to help millions of people struggling with all kinds of diseases. I mean, I'm not the guy out here who just wants to sell books and be on social media. I'm trying to get studies done. I'm very serious about this as a physician because my my whole reason for being is to try. The reason I went to medical school in the first place was you want to help the sick and suffering. And now that I have a very effective tool, at least in my mind, that does that, I'm very serious about doing that. And the one thing I like about the Bitcoin community is it's been open minded enough to embrace this stuff. Obviously, if you are a Bitcoiner, then you have to have, by definition, an open mind to say, hey, look, the status quo is not working. What they've been feeding us through whatever over the last 100 years is, you can go back. I guess you can go back to. I mean, some of you guys go back to like Jekyll Island or whatever. Uh, it's problematic. So that's been my sort of entrance into Bitcoin. I was asked to speak at the Bitcoin convention in Nashville this year. I got bumped by Trump, so I guess it's kind of funny that. But I'm going to be in the Vegas one next year. I've agreed to talk about that. And again, I'll talk about nutrition and health and how it relates, because I think when we talk about Bitcoin fixing things, and I see that meme all the time, it fixes everything, so to speak. You still have to have your health, and I think I love to see that there's places like the Beef Initiative, which is very much embraced. This Texas Slim, they've embraced Bitcoin and beef, and I think it's a good blend. I mean, I think marrying those two concepts is very beneficial. And so anyway, I'll just leave it at that and answer questions or participate any other way.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Go
I was
ahead,
going to
Nathan.
say, Dr. Baker, I'm kind of curious. I think you're right. I think there's this element of proof of work, and there has to be this open-mindedness and skepticism to even look at something like carnivore diet and consider that it might have a positive effect on your health. Just quickly going back to the beginning, I'm curious because I imagine this is not what you were taught in med school. This is not the zeitgeist of the day. What was it for you that prompted you to give this a shot and think that it would work from the beginning?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most physicians that have jumped upon on the lifestyle train, so to speak, and there's more and more doing, have had a personal experience. I mean, they weren't happy with their health. Maybe they were diagnosed with some disease, and they realized the conventional medicine was not the answer for them, and so then they became basically evangelized. They basically become evangelists for this. I not dissimilarly. I had a similar situation. I didn't have any kind of horrible disease, but I just wasn't happy with where my health was. I was in my kind of early 40s. I've been an athlete my whole life. I still am very much a competitive athlete. But despite all that, despite all the working out I was doing, my health just wasn't where I wanted it to be. And so I started playing with all kinds of nutrition. I didn't starting out just eating meat. I started out on a low fat, high fiber, lots of vegetables, lots of lean meat diet. And I did indeed lose weight, but and I got leaner, but I was literally miserable. I was like, there's no way I can sustain this. This is just, I can't, I remember the nurses in the hospital were like, yeah, we really like the fat Dr. Baker way better because you're kind of an ass, and that was what was going on. I was just hungry and miserable all the time. So that wasn't tenable. So I made this sort of transition over the years where I went paleo and then I went low carb and then I went on a ketogenic diet. And then what really was, I think, the aha moment for me was I was at a place where I was the head of orthopedic surgery for this, large group. And one of the things we were endeavoring to do is we had a lot of obese patients, as you might imagine, a lot of obese patients end up needing knee replacements. And the problem was those patients would have higher rates of complications. They would have greater rates of blood clots. They would have higher rates of infections. They just wouldn't rehab as well. They were more technically difficult to operate on. And so we as a community got together in the city and said, hey, look, we're no longer going to operate on patients with a BMI above 35 without a significant attempt to have them lose weight. And there was no like, this is how we're going to do it. It was just like you're left to your own devices to figure out how to get them to lose weight. And I was at that time, doing this ketogenic diet. And I said, well, I'm going to do that with my patients, right? I'm going to see what happens. And, I couldn't convince the majority of patients to do it. I mean, maybe 20% would actually take me up on the dietary thing. But the ones that would, and this was very interesting to me, I would see them back like 2 weeks later. And more often than not, they would say, you know what, doc, I really haven't lost much weight, lost a lot of weight yet. I might have lost a couple pounds, but my knee doesn't hurt anymore. And the primary indication for doing a knee replacement is pain. And when they were telling me that my knee doesn't hurt, I was like, well, then we may not need to do the surgery. And so that's where I started to discover that nutrition really has a role. Because one of the reasons I went into orthopedics is because I was like, as a medical student, I was, you're exposed to all the specialties. I would see all the primary care specialties, internal medicine, family practice. And those doctors were miserable because they were never getting results. Their patients were always, quote unquote, non-compliant. They never got better. The drugs weren't helping. And so I didn't want to do that. So I said, I'm going to go be a surgeon. And like some guy breaks his leg, I'll stick a metal rod down there, boom, sew him up, and good to go. I don't have to worry about that. But what I came to realize is about 80% of my practice as a generalist orthopedist was just people with arthritis and rotator cuff problems and carpal tunnel disease. And that is all, in my view, a consequence of poor metabolic health. And so when I became to wake up to that, um, I found that by affecting the lifestyle, we could actually avoid a lot of surgeries and we can prevent a lot of diseases. Now, the real opening, the really sort of thing that really opened my eyes is when I started to, as the head of orthopedics, talk to the hospital administrators about, hey, I'd like to have a half a day a week where I just do lifestyle. And guess what their response was to that? It was no. It was absolutely not. We don't want you doing that because you're being paid to operate on people. I'm sort of summarizing what was going on, but I mean, it made me realize that medicine has become very much just a business. It's more about, generating, just cranking that wheel as hard as you can, as fast as you can. More throughput, more operations means more money, means more, more overall profit. And so that sort of jaded me on medicine. And so this is why I do what I do today. And I'm very, very much a critic of our healthcare system because I think the incentives are perversely aligned. I think we've got some real problems here. And I think that until we're willing to have the courage to do that, we're just going to have more and more of the same. The answer to the chronic disease epidemic is just not more drugs. I mean, I know a lot of people are like celebrating these new weight loss drugs, the GLP-1s, but at the end of the day, that cannot and will not be the solution. I think, ultimately we have to do this. And I think people like Bitcoiners are going to be some of the ones that are going to adopt this and force that change. And, again, the more capital you have behind Bitcoin, the more power and influence you're going to be able to have. It's going to be a point where, instead of sort of being on defense, you can go on offense and say, hey, look, we're going to start changing policy. And I hope that's what happens. I hope, because I think most people that do big, I mean, obviously there's some people that are in there to make a buck. I mean, there's some people that obviously invest and are like, but I think the one thing that separates Bitcoin from a lot of the other, as my friend Safe would say, shit coins or the altcoins, is that there is this sort of belief and desire for societal improvement. And I think that's what attracted me to Bitcoin. And that's why I still very much am supportive of this community.
Come for the gains and stay for the revolution. Emma, I say that you got your hand up here. You got a question for us?
Yeah. So thanks so much, Dr. Baker. I really appreciate your work and the fact that you're putting yourself out there as a physician, because, I mean, there's definitely a lot at stake for you to be doing what you do. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the concept of decentralization in medicine. Prior to the early 1910s, I would say pre-Flexner, who kind of came in and standardized medical education, which has implications for why we have such a pharmaceutical-driven society or medical society today. I'm curious if you think on a Bitcoin standard, will you think that we will move to a more decentralized healthcare system? And just curious also, how can Bitcoiners be better advocates for a decentralized healthcare?
Yeah, I think decentralized everything is probably going to be helpful in many regards. I mean, obviously we're in the middle of this crazy election cycle. We don't know what's going to happen yet. I mean, if Musk gets in there and just takes a scalpel or an axe to the government and starts demanding efficiency. We may see some real change. I know with the food system, I know RFK, you bring up the Flexner report. Before, when people would talk about the Flexner report, you'd be considered a conspiracy theorist. I mean, that's, oh my God, that's all, crazy Rockefeller craziness, it's all this conspiracy theory. But really, the reality is medicine has become increasingly centralized. I mean, you see these giant healthcare corporations, whether it's Kaiser, whether it's Intermountain Health, some of these other companies that just buy up all these practices and then everybody gets told. Then you have medicine being practiced by algorithm, and it's a real problem because it stifles creativity, it stifles science, it stifles advances in many ways. I mean, it drives them in the direction of maybe certain pharmaceuticals and certain technologies, but at the same time, it detracts from this. So I do think that the stats on, if you look at the stats on, like, there's an interesting graph that shows number of physicians over the last 20 or 30 years versus the number of administrators. And the physician population has largely been stable, maybe seen like 2-3% growth, whereas the number of administrators has gone up by 15 fold. And that's because we have this sort of mindset of getting more efficient at billing and capturing revenue and coding and so on and so forth. And medicine has become very much corporatized. And so you saw that during like COVID, for instance, when physicians had the audacity to say, hey, wait a minute, I think we should have some informed consent around this stuff. They were literally, made to be pariahs, and some of them were threatened with their license. And, it's just absolute insanity that we can have this sort of group think when we have this centralized thing. So I think we need to have uh, disparate voices that have the ability to talk. And this goes to censorship, where we have, tech platforms shutting you down. I mean, during COVID, I had my YouTube channel shut down 5 separate occasions because I just had the audacity to say we should talk about informed consent around this stuff. Um, so whether it's decentralized food supply, and I see my friend regeneritarianism in here, Stephen, he can talk about that. We're seeing greater and greater centralization of the food. We're having the concept of intellectual property with food as software, as guys like Bill Gates would like to patent food products so that they can control it in perpetuity. So yes, I think that as you guys know, that Bitcoin becomes decentralized, so that you can't have any one person with their thumb on the button. Now, I mean, my concern would be, and maybe you guys can talk to this. Maybe if BlackRock buys up 1 million Bitcoin, now do they become or Michael Saylor decides they're going to become some kind of evil tyrant? How does that work in that scenario? And that's something that's beyond me. But I'm just wondering about that. As long as we have all the quote unquote plebes uh, owning most of the Bitcoin, and we have the plebes being doctors and farmers and ranchers, then I think that's going to be a better way to do things. I mean, before we had civilization, when we were all hunter and gatherers, I mean, nobody really owned anything. I mean, it was all kind of community property, and I think so, you could argue that society worked better in that situation. So I think the more we centralize, the more potential for a very scary outcome there is. I mean, particularly depending on who controls that stuff. And right now, you could argue that some of the people that kind of run things behind the scenes may not have the best interest of society in general.
I completely agree. And just this idea of disintermediating, like going direct to the farmer, going direct to your doctor, I think is better for everyone involved. Ben, I see you got your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah. First off, again, Dr. Baker, thank you for doing this. Much appreciated. I'm in the midst of a journey away from a previously, we'll say, intermittently trash diet to much more meat consumption and just a general kind of healthier lifestyle. But I guess I'll touch on the last topic that you brought up, like if somebody owns too much Bitcoin, well, quote unquote, too much Bitcoin, like what does that afford them? The nice part about it is, in the legacy system, a lot of money kind of allows you more money. Like if you're buddy with people that are close to the money spigot, then you can more or less extract wealth from the rest of society. That's what it allows you to do. Whereas with Bitcoin, owning a lot of Bitcoin in no way guarantees you more Bitcoin. The only way that you can obtain more Bitcoin is by providing value to others. It gives you no control over the protocol. It gives you no control over the rules. You can't suddenly say, "Oh, let's print more Bitcoin." So in that way, like a lot of the early Bitcoiners that were lucky enough to come across Bitcoin early, stack a bunch of Bitcoin, and were prescient enough to hold on to it. Most of those people, they couldn't obtain the amount of Bitcoin that they have today if they wanted to purchase it. And furthermore, if they want to enjoy it, they're going to have to use it on people that are creating enough value to convince them to part with their sats. But on a separate topic, when you're talking about your YouTube channel getting banned multiple times during COVID, I've had my scares with that. We just had another YouTube channel, Simply Bitcoin. They were offline for a week. They got banned. And so a lot of Bitcoiners are it's interesting, the rabbit holes that sends you down. If you find Bitcoin and you begin questioning kind of the money system, it opens you up to questioning other things. And that was my first foray into, when I moderately understood Bitcoin and then saw it reported completely inaccurately in the news, it made me start to think, well, if I know a little bit about this thing and I'm 100% sure it's being reported wrong, what other things that I know less about are also being reported wrong? And so that leads you down food and other items. So my question to you is, in and around the bans here, number one, have you heard of Nostr and are you on it? And if not, would you consider taking a look at Nostr, because it's effectively a way of having the first use case is kind of like a censorship resistant social media layer, but more than that, it's a way of all of your social connections belonging to you. So you can imagine if you got banned from say X, let's say, Musk hadn't come over and given a semblance of free speech here. If you were banned from a social platform, it's like you migrating to a different app, like, I don't know, TikTok or Instagram, and all of your connections that you made on X are just there and exist. And even though you're not on the TikTok app or you're not on the X app, if you post on a different app, all the people that are on the old app can also still see you there. So it's like wherever you go, your content is your own and anybody can see it from anywhere at any time and it can't be censored. So it might be something worth looking into. And lo and behold, Nostr was conceptualized and created by a Bitcoiner. So we're the peak, I think.
Yeah, I'm not on Nostr. I've heard of it, and I've heard people talking about it. I tried, I remember I was on Rumble for a period of time, but it was just so technically problematic for me to upload stuff. I just got frustrated with it. So I've kind of, I've got, decent social media presence across most of the major platforms, but it does seem to make sense, and maybe I'll look into it. I have somebody that's kind of helping me with my social media now. For years I did, and I was answering all my messages, and it was like 3 or 4 hours every day answering questions, which got to be a little bit overwhelming. And so, yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to that. And if it works like you said, I just don't know what the experience is like. If it's more like an X experience where you have this back and forth, or if it's just uploading videos, or because I do a lot of everything, so it might be something that would work well. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll pin a tutorial on like an easy app that you can play around with, anyways. But the cool thing about it is if you're posting content there, you'll have like a native Bitcoin wallet built in, and people, rather than hitting like, actually send tips directly to your wallet connected there, rather than, yeah. So anyways, I'll pin it in the nest there if you end up taking a peek later.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, and I highly recommend Nostr as well, and personally like the Primal app that is used to navigate it. I think it's very user friendly, especially for someone new to it. So definitely worth checking out. I also want to remind the audience that if anyone has any questions to come up, raise your hand. We'll invite you to speak. But while we're waiting for that, Dr. Baker, I actually had a question for you regarding fasting. And something that I've been doing over the last few months is doing like an intermittent fasting approach where it's maybe like 14 to 16 hours every day of fasting and then an 8-hour eating window. And I just want to hear your opinions on that, and maybe some of the science behind it, that because I felt like it works pretty well for me, and I feel like my energy levels are just better. I've started not needing the meals as much, and I think it's helped me with my weight as well, because I'm not eating as much just because I don't have as much time to. So if you'd like to touch on that a little bit, I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yeah, sure. So I think that
Yeah.
certainly there's a lot of people that are able to successfully fast and lose weight, and it can be beneficial. I mean, the critics would say it's no more beneficial than just caloric restriction. However, to do that, I think is fine. So fasting can certainly work for a lot of people, and intermittent fasting. I mean, I do that myself. I mean, I think it's 11:30 where I'm at. I last ate it around 7 p.m. last night. I've got a podcast to do after this, so I have my first meal at 1 p.m. today. So that's going to be something like 18 hours, which is fine. I'm not that hungry. I'm going to have a big old ribeye steak. But if we look at the way we eat today versus the way we probably evolved to eat, you think about, let's just go back a few thousand years, where we were hunter gatherers, before the advent of agriculture, 8, 10, 12,000 years ago. It would not have been convenient to stop and eat every 2 to 3 hours like we do now. I mean, it would have been, you think about it right now, the convenience we have microwaves, we have packaged foods, we have, kitchens, back in the day when we were like nomads. I mean, you think about it, you got to stop and build a fire if you're going to cook something, you don't have pots and pans and necessarily cleaning things. So it's going to be really challenging. So I think we probably ate by default in a very infrequent pattern. But I think more importantly, the type of food you eat will drive the ease by which that can happen. So if you're on a high carb diet, a processed diet, eating all the snack foods, because we have an entire snack food industry, it's really hard to fast because you're in this sort of cellular crisis mode. You start getting quote unquote hangry. Your blood glucose starts crashing, and you don't have a backup fuel source because you're not very good at utilizing fat. And so you're starving all the time. So then what do? You eat all the time. And you have dietitians say, well, you need to eat every, 2 to 3 hours to keep your blood sugar regulated. And that, again, that's predicated on what kind of dietary baseline you have. And so I think there's obviously a lot of data around fasting, and there's a lot of data that shows it's beneficial for all sorts of diseases and metabolic states. That's pretty clear. Now the question is, at some point you have to eat. I mean, there are people who do extended fast where they won't eat for 3 days, 5 days, a week, sometimes a month. That's not sustainable. We've got to eat something. So the question is, well, what do you eat? And I would argue that a diet that contains a lot of meat, whether you're full carnivore or mostly carnivore, basically lends itself to fasting very easily. I find that like if you tell most people, like if you walk up to the average person in the street and said, "Hey, guess what? Tomorrow you don't get to eat." For most people, that would set them in a sense of panic. They would be just shaking. They would be nervous about that. If you told me tomorrow, "Hey, you don't get to eat," I would be like, "No big deal. I do it all the time." Like when I travel overseas, I usually don't eat the stuff on the plane because it's usually garbage food. So I just say, and plus I'm not doing it. I'm literally sitting there the whole time. So I'm like, why do I need to eat if I'm just sitting here? There's nothing, I'm not really even expending any energy at all. I know, yeah, there's a basal metabolic rate, but I've got enough body fat where, I mean, most of us have 100,000 calories of body fat. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's not that much. If you think about how much calories are in a pound of fat. So, yes, fasting can be beneficial. I think some people can take it to an extreme. I think some people can overutilize it. Again, there is a danger of not eating enough and becoming there's metabolic consequences to that. So I think using it judiciously, using it maybe sporadically or randomly is better because your body will adapt. Like if you say every Monday I'm going to fast for 48 hours, eventually it's going to lose its efficacy because our body's pretty smart. It learns to compensate. So I think using it in sort of a more of a random pattern might have more benefit. But again, I don't think the natural pattern of diet in a human being is to eat and graze all day, which is what we've been trained to do. Most of us, eat at breakfast, a bowl of cereal at 7. They might have a muffin at 9:30. Then they have something at lunch, and then they have their mid-afternoon snack because they have a crash. Then they have dinner at 6 p.m. and then they have a late night snack. And so we're eating literally continuously, and that is, I would argue, that's not how our human system is set up, and digestive wise, and what we're supposed to be doing.
That makes sense. Yeah, I completely agree with that. We had a question in the chat here, something I'm not familiar with, so I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. They were asking about, I believe, Stargardt's disease, Stargadt, and carnivore diet, if you've seen any information regarding that.
So it's spelled Stargardt's disease, because I've not even heard of that. So maybe it's a misspelling or something like that. So I'm trying to even think what would even sound like that. Stargardt's disease. I have not seen that. I would maybe they can clarify exactly what they're referring to, what to deal with. What I've seen, I will just tell you in general. I think that all diseases, I don't care if it's acute trauma versus chronic disease, will benefit from better nutrition. I think that's just a very common sense thing to say. And what I've seen, which is really some of the things that have blown me away, diabetes, yeah, it makes sense. You cut out carbs, you're on carnivore, that gets better. You might see some obesity, you might see gut issues improve. Those all make sense to me. I think it's pretty easily explained mechanistically. But I've literally seen things like Tourette's syndrome get better. I've seen things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is literally a genetic connective tissue disorder. And I remember the first time I saw this presentation, and I've seen it dozens, if not hundreds of times since that time. There was a 57-year-old emergency room physician who had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and she would wake up uh, every day with like 3 or 4 joints dislocated. Her shoulder would be dislocated, her wrist would be dislocated, her ankle would be dislocated. She'd start her day out by putting her joints back in place, every single day. She would go to work in the ER, and about every other ER shift, her shoulder would dislocate. She'd have to have that put back in. And that was her life. And she was developing arthritis and on, as you might expect, with your joints dislocating all the time. She went on a carnivore diet, and within 1 month, she stopped having dislocation, which I still don't quite understand the mechanism by which that works. And she's never had another dislocation since that time. It's been like 6 years now. So whatever this Stargardt's disease, which I've never heard of, and maybe it's a misspelling, I'm not sure. Probably it's worth at least trying. I don't think there's a downside to it. And it's the number of conditions that I can add to the list of things that I've seen the diet help it just continues to grow by the week, literally. I mean, the number of people like things with like Crohn's disease. Literally, just before I was in this meeting, I had a consultation with a patient that was 12-year-old kid diagnosed with Crohn's disease. He's now 25. He's been on all these biologics. They stopped working. Went carnivore a few months ago. Within 3 weeks, no more symptoms. And this is something that physicians have been treating him with for years: medication after medication, steroids, biologic drugs. Never mentioning that diet has anything to do with it. I mean, he had tried a few diets, like specific carbohydrate diet and things like that, but he never had any significant relief. But when he went carnivore, he now has no symptoms. And he was asking me about basically like how do I gain weight and so on and so forth. But I mean, from a disease standpoint, incredibly powerful. It's worth trying. If you're going to try it, do it for 3 months. And the reason I say that is because back a few years ago, I had about 12,000 people that were on the diet that I had surveyed and asked them a whole bunch of questions. One of the questions was, how long did it take before you started seeing significant relief for, whatever condition, XYZ condition? And 3 months was kind of the point where the vast majority of people saw some significant benefit. So if that disease, whatever Stargardt's disease is, which I've never heard of, and there's tens of thousands of diseases. So there's all kinds of these crazy diseases that most doctors have never heard of. I've seen somebody told me, well, I have this disease that only affects like 12 people in the world. Do you have any studies on that? I'm like, no, I don't, believe it or not, because it only affects 12 people in the world, but it's worth at least considering. Okay.
Very good.
Awesome.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I'm actually a little curious if you could maybe touch on what is considered a carnivore diet, because that gets thrown around and it is kind of like a vague topic. I mean, obviously it includes meat, but I've heard some people say you should only be eating like red meat and not chicken. But I'm also and maybe just frame it in a way from somebody that has a regular, maybe American or Western diet that is already they're consuming maybe not so healthy things. And what's a good like stepping stone to start with? Should they just go cold turkey, just right to all meat, or are there certain things that they could include and maybe start to slowly wean off of as well, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, one of the things we have to realize is that meat, particularly red meat, has been improperly and unfairly demonized over the last really 100 years. And I think that's a real problem that we've had. And I think it's caused a lot of people a lot of problems. Now, I'm not religious about this diet. I'm not the guy, I think it's a therapeutic option. I think there's people that want to, adopt it as a lifestyle and maybe get a tattoo and call themselves Carnivore Carl and be on social media. I don't care about that stuff. I mean, that's whatever. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I think that, um, you know, again, not everybody needs to be on a strict carnivore diet to receive. It's not the only healthy diet out there. I mean, there's other ways to do that. If you just increase your overall consumption of high quality nutrition, and I consider animal products high quality nutrition, and you decrease your consumptive junk, you're going to get a benefit for most people. Now, there are people, let's say somebody with Crohn's disease or some significant autoimmune disease, those people may benefit from a more strict approach. And I think that makes sense. I think for some people, there's a lot of issues, believe it or not. There's a lot of food addiction out there. There are a lot of people, there's some estimates that 14% of the population is suffering from some form of food addiction. That sort of mirrors the alcoholism rate, and whether that number is accurate or not, you can debate. But certainly I see that very frequently, that if you tell, one of the biggest crimes, I think, is you have these dietitians saying there's no such thing as a bad food and all things in moderation. And if you can't eat like, bright blue Captain Crunch flavored artificial maple syrup, then you have an eating disorder, which I think is just insane in itself. I think the standard American diet, quite honestly, is an eating disorder. I would be so bold as to say that. So I think that anything that gets you, more towards more nutrition, you think about, why do we eat in the first place? What is the point of eating? And it is to, literally, it's to basically take in nutrition. It's essential amino acids, it's essential fats, it's some amount of energy, it's vitamins, it's minerals, and you could argue for water. Basically, that's why we consume food in the first place. And, you know, when we start, and this is the argument I often see about, well, what about all the fiber and all this stuff? And I'm like, well, what does fiber actually do? And I get a lot of people that are mad at me when I say fiber is overrated. And you think about, what does fiber do? Well, fiber actually inhibits the absorption of nutrition, and that's calories. So some people get a benefit that they just don't absorb as many calories, and they end up, they have bigger bowel movements, and they go to the bathroom more, and they feel better because maybe they like the anal distension. I'm, kind of being a little snarky here, but um, and so you just actually just end up, a lot of your nutrition ends up in the toilet. And there's actually studies that show that people that consume high fiber diets actually, through their feces, lose more protein, more fat, and more carbohydrates. So a lot of that nutrition ends up in the toilet. So by going carnivore, or mostly carnivore, or some people want to call it animal based, I think you sort of get to where you're absorbing more nutrition, but the actual purpose of nutrition is being better served. And if it has some other benefits with satiety, which I think it does, that also helps. If it helps you avoid the hyper addictive foods, that's also a good thing. So I think, like for most people, obviously cutting out the ultra processed crap is step one. And the problem with that is, what do you replace it with? Well, if I replace ultra processed crap with spinach, it's not gonna satisfy me. You think about how much nutrition or how much value to get out of a bunch of leaves. Yeah, I mean, it might fill up your gut a little bit if you eat a whole bunch of them, but you're not really absorbing much of the nutrition. You're going to end up hungry, and you see it all the time. You see these women that have these eating disorders. Well, they'll in the daytime they'll go out, they'll eat a little salad, maybe they have a little tiny strip of chicken with it. Dressing will, of course, be on the side, or a low fat dressing, and then they go home at night and they're just, they're the elbows deep into ice cream, because they can't stand it. And so the diet that is rich in animal products provides you the satiety and the nutrition, so you don't have to have these sort of maladaptive behaviors around nutrition. The fact that we believe that we got to take all these prebiotics and probiotics and supplements and all this crap, it's just a patch for the crappy diet we have. You literally don't even need a microbiome to have a carnivore diet. It's irrelevant, right? Because meat is fully digested in the proximal intestine. It's the stomach and the small intestine. When is the last time you crapped out a piece of meat? You think about that. It never happens. If it does, you got a real problem. I've never even heard of that. But you talk to any gastroenterologist, when they do a colonoscopy, they never find meat in the colon. What do they find? They find vegetable material, hunks of corn, seeds, pieces of nuts, undigested vegetation. That is nutrition that is basically being wasted. It's like, so again, this diet leads to better nutrition in many, many ways.
That's awesome. Thank you. Emma and Ben, I see both have your hands up. Emma, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a question that one of the listeners put forward around having persistent high blood pressure despite clean carnivore diet exercise for years and also good potassium sources on carnivore. Any insights you may have there, Dr. Baker?
Yeah, hypertension, and again, I will just say that, one of the thoughts around hypertension, we often hear about like sodium. If you eat a lot of sodium, you're going to have high blood pressure, and it's idiopathic. Not like 90% of the hypertension diagnoses are quote unquote either essential hypertension or idiopathic, which means we have no clue. We're basically idiots about it. And what we find is a lot of times when you decrease sort of the general inflammation in the body, the vascular inflammation, the blood pressure resolves. So see a lot of people will go carnivore and their blood pressure will normalize. They'll actually have to come off their blood pressure medicines. But there are a small percentage of people in which there is a sort of defined reason for their blood pressure. So this person might need to get investigated. Maybe they have some sort of renal abnormality that's driving that outside of something that inflammation or diet might have an impact on. So I think there's that. You said they've been on it for quite a while now. So I mean, there is sort of a paradoxical increase in blood pressure for some people initially when they start, just due to the fact that any kind of major dietary shift is somewhat stressful to the body. I mean, and there's this adaptation period of time. And so during that initial stressful period of time, you might see your blood pressure rise. But if they've been on it chronically and they're still having hypertension, I would look at some of the other sources that we might know. Like like I said, sometimes the renal vascular can be a problem. Sometimes there's problems with the adrenal. There's things like a chromocytoma, which is a benign tumor, but it can lead to blood pressure issues. So I would be worked up for that if they haven't done that, and then go from there.
Awesome. Thank you. Ben, you got your hand up.
Yeah. Dr. Baker, I was just curious your take on, I'm pretty certain which direction you're going to take on it, but I just would love some additional insight. You were talking about how there's this current approach in the media of, you should be able to eat whatever you want, and we're seeing things like, obesity is hereditary and cannot be controlled by how you eat. Like I've seen articles like this, and then they're basically offering up the option of, hey, just take this pill, take Ozempic, take whatever it is. Are you aware of? Is there any studies yet as to what these things are doing to the body if you're taking something like Ozempic? I know it's relatively new, but where do you stand on this, and what have you heard and what have you seen?
Yeah, I don't think Ozempic or tirzepatide or any of the GLP-1s or any other drug that comes after it, for that matter, is going to be the ultimate fix for chronic disease or even the obesity epidemic. Certainly, there are patients that lose weight on this drug. It's something that what we're going to see is there's going to be class action lawsuits because a lot of people are going to have issues with that, whether it's thyroid cancer or suicide or bowel obstruction or gastroparesis. We know those things are happening and coming in a decent number of people. But I mean, again, the question is, do the benefits outweigh the risks? They'll make that argument. And one of the things that many people will see is, long-term data seems to show that a lot of people, particularly if they come off the drug, they just regain the weight over time. And one of the things that's interesting, we have this concept, or it's not a concept, it's actually what happens. We actually see fat cell hyperplasia. And so that's to be contrasted between fat cell hypertrophy. So either the fat cell can get bigger or more fat cells can occur. And what happens is with semaglutide, I believe, it shows that the fat cells actually hypertrophy. So you get more fat cells, but they're very small, so the overall volume is less. But once you come off the drug, you have more fat cells now. So basically, you're gonna eventually probably have issues with those fat cells now becoming insulin resistant. Assuming you continue on the same diet. Now, there are some people that will use it as a sort of a crutch to get them to the point where they maybe start adopting a healthy diet and lifestyle. And I think in that situation, it can be utilized reasonable. I mean, we've got data on these GLP-1s that go back maybe 15 years, primarily used in the diabetic population. Interestingly, the Harvard study that looked at carnivore showed that 100% of the people were able to come off the GLP-1s when they went carnivore. And actually, meat is actually very potent at stimulating GLP-1, which is kind of also an interesting thing in a very physiologically appropriate way. I mean, GLP-1 is supposed to be stimulated by nutrients hitting the gut, particularly the ileum, where these L cells that secrete this occur. There's this concept of what's called the ileal brake. And so what happens is as nutrition passes through our intestines, if it gets too far down the tract and it hasn't been absorbed yet, the L cells in the ileum, which is the end of the small intestine, sense that and say, slow everything down. And this is what GLP-1 is actually doing. It's just slowing the gut down so that anything you put in there doesn't absorb as well, or absorbs much more slowly, leading to, in many cases, satiety. I think that what we're going to see is a lot of people, just like we saw with bariatric surgery, people will figure out how to overcome that. Addicts will addict. I mean, you can put all kinds of barriers in front of addicts, whether they're physical barriers or drug barriers. They will get around that eventually. So I think the people that temporarily will benefit from this will eventually, if they don't actually address the lifestyle and the addiction issues, they're gonna overcome that. I think you'll just see that. You'll figure out ways that people will figure out how to get past the GLP-1 effect and still, deal with that addiction. It's sort of interesting to see how quickly a lot of doctors are just cheerleading this. And in my one of the things one of my early mentors when I was training was said, don't be the first guy to adopt this thing, and don't be the last also. So we'll have to see. I would reserve any real judgment until we have data going back 5 years or more, and then we'll see. We'll get a better picture because the way the drug process goes. I mean, we have these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and then really the phase 4 clinical trial is just when they release it on the public. And if you look at, like, for instance, the FDA has recalled something like 14,000 drugs, since like 2010. So I mean, that's like an amazing amount of drugs that were previously deemed safe and effective, and now they're all being recalled, kind of quietly under the rug. And some of it's because of safety concerns, some of it's because of efficacy concerns, some of it because of other reasons. But that clearly happens. Now, when a drug is poised to make $1 trillion, which this is what this drug will probably do, there's going to be a lot of resistance to, like, where we're going to ignore all these sort of problematic signals until we've returned our investment. So, maybe we'll see that 10 years from now, we're like, that drug really wasn't that good. We injured a lot of people. Maybe we shouldn't promote it as much. But by that time, we'll be on to the second or third or fourth generation. We'll be on to the next drug. And that's just how that model works. It's not about cure. It's not about cures. I mean, if you think about where all the money and investment into drugs go, it's not about curing cancer or eradicating some disease. It's about chronic, persistent medication for life, and that's what we see. And again, I think that's a real problem. I think the more people that realize that's not going to be the ultimate solution. Now, it's a good solution. I mean, Goldman Sachs did an analysis a couple of years ago about, does curing disease make sense? And their answer was no, absolutely not. It makes no financial sense to do so. So these drugs are purposely designed for you to take for life, to not cure the problem, and for people medicated. And I think that's what I'm trying to get away from. That's what our company Rivero is doing. We're trying to get people off medications and try to get them out of the system, so that these people don't need to be chronic customers.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I completely agree. The incentives are so misaligned that they're pushing people into persistent customers, always just treating the symptoms and not addressing the underlying issues. I do want to make sure we save time so we can talk a little bit about Rivero and the work you're doing there as well too. But David Smith, I saw you came up. Do you have a question for ourselves or Dr. Baker?
Yes, I do. I want to thank Dr. Baker for all his work. I met him at Low Carb Denver a number of years ago. And about the last 9 years, I've been using the carnivore, low carb, keto type diet to put my bipolar 2 into complete remission. I had a bipolar 2 condition for 36 years, cyclical depressions and hypomanic episodes, which was treatment resistant. So it became quite obnoxious. I eventually just had to suffer with it. Then I found this diet kind of on my own. I was like, well, I was taking lamotrigine, which didn't work. That's an anticonvulsant. They give anticonvulsants to epileptic. And keto diet works for epilepsy. Let me give it a try. And I never thought I could break my addiction to carbs, which I had not as a child, but after college, I developed this sort of dopamine addiction to carbs, exercise, sex, and porn, and those just all disappeared. So I've been in complete remission for the last 9 years. It's been absolutely phenomenal. And I was interviewed by Ian Campbell and Matt Bazuki, the Bazuki Foundation, on Bipolar Cast episode 22. If people want to listen to that, there's some interesting work I did with hyperthermic stress. And my question comes from part of that. The only time I've had trouble with bowels movements is intense hyperthermic stress or very, very hot weather where I didn't drink enough water and salt. And I'm pretty much, pretty low fiber diet, but generally no problem with bowels with this diet at all, except extremely hot weather and not drinking enough water and salt. And I'd like Dr. Baker to talk about that and maybe add in one more thing. I know 3 people on the keto diet have been using it to treat epilepsy and bipolar, myself included, who have had appendicitis later in life, age 30, 40, and I actually had it at age 62. So I'd like them to talk, just reflect on that, on the possibility that that could be contributing, or it could be just coincidence. Thank you all. Listening.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting topics there. So I think that when we look at bowel function, our electrolytes do play a role there. I mean, there's a neuromuscular component to the way our bowels work. There's this so-called migratory motor complex, and so electrolytes are going to have a role there. And so dehydration can certainly impact that. So I'm not surprised that that's the case. And also, I'd like to just comment on the bipolar. I mean, this is one of the early proponents of this diet before it was even called carnivore was a gal named Amber O'Hearn. She's not a physician. She's like a software engineer. She's like a linguist, like specialized in Russian language and stuff like that. Very bright woman. Her bipolar was put into remission, not because she didn't do the diet for that. She did the diet to lose weight. And then she found out, oh my gosh, my bipolar went away. And so now we've seen, and thanks to like Jan Bazuki, who is, they're obviously part of the Roblox family. So they've got a lot of resources. So they've been pushing this whole thing. So it's been really neat to see that evolve. But as far as the question about the appendicitis, I have seen a few people on carnivore develop appendicitis over the years. I don't know that it's unique or specific to the diet. I mean, if you look at just the general population stats on people developing appendicitis later in life, it's actually higher than you would think. And I think it's just something that's probably just coincidental, quite honestly. I mean, things still happen. There's still going to be people that are going to die on carnivore. There's still people that are going to have heart attacks. There's still people that are going to get cancer. It's not a get out of free charge or card, live forever type of thing. So I think it's probably if what I'd like to see done, and we don't have, again, I'm advocating for studies on this. What is the population incidence of appendicitis, say over age 40? If you look that up, and I have in the past, it's actually quite high. So you would say, what is the incidence in carnivores? And so we don't know. We just don't know how many there are. We don't know what percentage of them develop appendicitis. My impression is it's probably very similar in incidence, because I haven't heard of a lot of people developing. I mean, it's not like every 5th person develops appendicitis on carnivore. It's probably one in 1,000, maybe, if I had to guess. And so we could look at that compared to the general population stats and see, like, again, there are people out there that will make claims about this diet that's going to make you live longer or avoid disease. I'm not one of those guys. I don't know, because I don't think we have data on that. And honestly, I don't think that data is even likely to be obtainable realistically, because it's so hard to do a long-term human diet data. It's almost an impossible ask. And so anybody that says a vegan diet is going to make you live longer, or a Mediterranean diet is going to make you live longer, or a carnivore diet is going to make you live longer, I would be very cautious about anybody making those claims, because I just don't think there's any data that would really support that. So anyway, that's my thoughts on those things.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. But one thing, people who are interested in appendicitis or worried about it, I had a surgical technique which costs thousands of dollars and requires some, time in the hospital. But there is an antibiotic technique, although there is a higher recurrence rate, of course, since you still have an appendix. And then I found out from a Chinese Chinese woman in America, is a GI doc, that says that there is a lavage technique where they put in a colonoscopy tube and lavage out the unperforated appendix, and it costs $35, and there's no anesthesia and no recovery. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that into the mix there. But thanks for
Yeah, I
everything.
mean, the antibiotics is that's well described in the literature. I mean, that's clear. I mean, obviously a lap, most people do a lap appy where they just a couple holes and pull it out. That's the surgical way we do it these days. But yeah, I mean, for sure, having your appendix removed is not the only way to treat appendicitis, unless of course it becomes septic and it's perforated. Then you're kind of stuck in that situation.
But I
Awesome.
will like to put a vote in for addiction. We talked about food addictions. I did meet Dr. Rob Sywis at one of the conferences, and he said, "Look, with bariatric surgery, I can kill your best friend in one day, and you need to find a new best friend, or otherwise you're going to be finding other evil best friends, like addictions to other things, drugs and shopping and kleptomania and things like that." But yeah, put my vote in for dealing with root causes. But thanks for everything.
Awesome. Thank you so
Sure,
much, David.
thank you.
We are getting close to the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time, but I want to give Sir for Jim, who's a hand up here for a bit, a chance to speak.
Hey, thank you so much. So, Dr. Baker, I've been following your work for a few years now. I adopted a carnivore diet myself about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's greatly improved my health. So I just want to first thank you for all you've done to get the word out, help encourage folks like myself. I'm currently 63, looking at 64 early next year. So I feel half my age again. So thank you for that. A request that I would ask of you would be to do, if you haven't already, look into Dr. Jack Kruse and his work. He lost a lot of weight on a low carb diet, but he has issues with some of what people like yourself put out because you're leaving pieces of the puzzle out, is what he would say. I'd love to see a discussion.
The light, yeah,
yes,
the light,
yes,
yeah.
Thank you. So you do know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm aware. Yeah, I'm aware of Jack
I would
Kruse
love,
and stuff.
I would love it if you two could work it out to do one of these, to go back and forth, because I think you're both brilliant at what you do. But I did have one question very quickly. I'm addicted to milk my whole life.
Okay.
And I hear Ken Berry say all the time, milk is for baby mammals, of which I am no longer a baby, but I still love it. And it's the hardest thing for me to quit. And so I've never done a full, completely zero carb diet where I just eat meat, but I am about as close as you can get, because about the only carbs I eat now is I drink milk. But I could drink a gallon in a day, which is almost 200 grams. I'm just wondering what your feeling is about, am I doing myself a real disservice, or should I really quit the milk? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, well, you are right. I mean, milk is designed to grow animals. I mean, all of us theoretically were exposed to milk, at least when we were infants, or we should have been. And it's a wonderful. I mean, it's an incredibly rich source of nutrition. It's got a great fatty acid profile. It's got some decent protein. I mean, particularly when you start looking at like whey protein. Not necessarily I'm promoting whey protein shakes, but they're tremendous sources of nutrition. And so there are a number of people that struggle with dairy products for various reasons, whether they're lactose insensitive or they struggle with some of the various proteins that may be found in various forms of dairy. There's different forms of dairy that some people sort of variably tolerate. Some people will tolerate, ghees and butters and hard cheeses where they won't do well with milks and things like that. I would just say that. I mean, I consume dairy products from time to time. I certainly, they're enjoyable. They taste damn good. I was in Spain and France. And I sure as hell ate some cheese over there. It's because it's good stuff. But I think that you just have to look at, what. I'm not here to be the carnivore sort of perfectionist. I don't think this should be religious in any way. And a lot of people sort of adopted that, and they get this sort of cult-like attachment to it. I think you have to just assess what are your goals, how do you feel, what are you doing. I mean, is it a net positive for you, or is it minimally negative? There's some people where dairy is just a real problem. It leads to skin issues and gut issues, and it becomes a problem. If that's not the case, then, and I would posit that for just about any real food. I'm not here advocating that you should be drinking, Oreo cookies and Cokes, but I mean, if you can tolerate a little bit of fruit or a little bit of rice or something like that, that's fine as well. I look at it in that way. I think the least offensive food, I would say, or least likely to be not tolerated is going to be like ruminant meat. I think that, and I say that based on my own experience, the experience of many, many others, and also some of the data I've seen from other scientists that have looked into this stuff. But beyond that, if you want to round out your diet and have something that's sustainable for you, and you're in good health, then I don't see a problem with that. I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not here to make everybody on the planet carnivore. I'd like to see more people be healthy, and if carnivore is a tool that allows that, great. I think we should embrace it. We should celebrate it. We shouldn't demonize people that do it. I think like I said, I think there's so many potential benefits from this that the people that are out there that are sort of critical or negative on that really need to open their mind. Just like Bitcoin. I mean, it's like, like I said, there's a lot of, like I said, you can build wealth many ways. I mean, some people like to buy real estate. I know people say, well, there's problems with that. But again, at the end of the day, I mean, we'd like to have not as many people that are impoverished. I mean, I think that's generally a good thing. Yeah, so I think dairy can be fine for a lot of people. There are a lot of people that don't do well with that. So I think you just have to figure out where you are yourself and go from there. And again, I think we've heard a number of testimonials from people that have clearly improved their health there. So I mean, that alone, like I said, the only reason this diet is still hanging around for as long as it has is that because people are getting clear benefit from this. And I think that's something we should celebrate. I unfortunately got to go. I've got to do another podcast right now. I'm like 3 minutes behind that, so I apologize. I'd love to do another one of these. So if you guys want to do another one, I'd be happy to do another one. Maybe we can go for a longer period of time, but I do have to go now. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Baker. And yes, I have a long list of questions. Would love to have you back at some point in time too. Anybody who's not aware, please do follow Dr. Baker. Do check out Rivero, his operation going on there as well too. And I saw that you were speaking a lot lately, so hopefully we'll be able to catch you on the road as well. But enjoy the podcast and we'll talk again soon. Before we wrap up.
All right. Yeah, I'll be at Bitcoin in Las Vegas. So that'll be another place you can catch me. All right. Take care, guys. I got to go do another podcast. Bye-bye.
Take care, Dr. Baker.
That
Before
was
we wrap
awesome.
things up.
You guys. Thank you for hosting. I'm driving and I just saw it. I'm like, oh, no way. I might even be able to ask him a question. So thank you for letting me up. That was fantastic.
Glad to have you. Thank you for coming up and speaking.
Hell yeah, Jim.
You are more than welcome. And I apologize. I do see we have some other requests and a ton of questions right now. This has been a great space as we were able to get to everybody, but hopefully we'll be able to do it with Dr. Baker again, because obviously there's a lot of demand to talk to the guy, and he's just a fountain of knowledge there. Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up for today?
No, honestly, I just enjoyed listening to that. For me, it was just like a chance to sit back and listen and kind of absorb everything. I've got his book in front of me here. I'm not all the way through it, but again, I've been going down that path, and I know that you've been doing the carnivore thing. So it was pretty cool to kind of hear kind of where he came from for his line of thinking and kind of what he's encountered throughout his career. So yeah, that was super informative for myself.
Awesome. Ed, I'll pass it to you, buddy.
Yeah, really enjoyed the space today. Thanks again, Dr. Baker. I know you're not here, but I really appreciate that. It was a great talk, and I do apologize to the people that we didn't get to. Obviously, there's a lot of demand to talk to them, and hopefully we can get them on again and maybe continue the conversation where we left off. But I want to thank everybody that came up to speak as well and ask questions. Make sure you give all of them a follow. David over here, we had Surfer Jim. And then make sure to give Ben with BTC Sessions a follow, and then the Bitcoin Mentor people. We got Emma with Dream Grad Academy, Nathan with the Bitcoin Mentor handle, and I'm Edward with the Live Free BTC handle. If you follow me and Nathan, you can get up to date with when we do the spaces every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin Mentor, you can go to bitcoinmentor.io and email one of us book a free session with us to learn more about what we do, how we can help you with your Bitcoin journey, anything self-custodying your Bitcoin, running a node, multi-sig, all of that we can assist you with. But until we talk next time, hope everyone has a great day and take care.